Her billionaire husband said, "You are the worst mistake of my life." That mistake became the woman who ruined him. "You are the worst mistake of my life." The words echoed through the crystal chandeliers of the Plaza Ballroom. 500 of New York's elite suddenly silent, champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips, conversations dying mid-sentence. Dominic Ashford stood on the dance floor in his $15,000 tuxedo, looking at his wife, with the kind of disgust most people reserved for something they found on the bottom of their shoe. "I'd rather dance with a stranger off the street than pretend you belong here." Isla Moreau felt the phones come out, the camera flashes starting, the whispers beginning like a wave building toward shore. She stood there in the dress his mother had picked, the one designed to make her look cheap at a gala where every other woman glittered like a diamond, and something inside her that had been bending for 2 years finally snapped clean in half. She walked to the microphone. What happened next destroyed a billion-dollar empire, shattered a legacy family, and proved that sometimes the person you underestimate is the exact person who will dismantle everything you ever built. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to love you, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment saying, "I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline," and tell me where you're watching from, because this story is going to take you on a journey you won't forget. This is the story of how a woman they called a mistake became the woman who ruined the man who broke her. Let me take you back to where it all began. 3 years earlier, Isla Moreau was 25 years old and standing in the restoration lab of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, carefully cleaning centuries of grime from a painting most people would never get to see up close. She wore a white lab coat over jeans that had paint stains on them, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, her hands steady as a surgeon's as she worked on revealing the true colors hidden beneath layers of time and neglect. Art conservation was Isla's obsession, her calling, the thing that made sense when nothing else did. She'd grown up in a small apartment in Queens, raised by a single mother who cleaned houses to pay for Isla, his education, who believed her daughter was destined for something greater than the life they'd been given. When her mother died 2 weeks before Isla's college graduation, she'd made a promise over that hospital bed. She would make something of herself. She would honor the sacrifice. 6 years of working her way up from intern to junior conservator to finally being trusted with significant pieces. 6 years of living in a studio apartment, barely bigger than a closet, eating ramen, skipping social events to save money, pouring everything into her work. She was good at it. Better than good. She had an eye for detail that her supervisors called remarkable, an instinct for understanding what a painting was supposed to be beneath what time had made it become. "Miss Moreau," one of the senior curators, called from the doorway. "There's a donor event starting in the main hall. We need someone from conservation to speak about the restoration process. Are you available?" Isla looked down at her paint-stained jeans, her casual clothes, her complete lack of preparation for speaking to wealthy donors who funded the museum's work. "I'm not really dressed for it." "You're dressed like someone who actually does the work," the curator said with a smile. "That's more authentic than any cocktail dress. Come on, 15 minutes. Just talk about what you do. They love hearing from the actual experts." 20 minutes later, Isla stood in front of a small group of donors explaining the painstaking process of cleaning a 17th century Dutch painting, showing before and after photographs, talking about the chemistry of old varnish, and the patience required to reveal original brushstrokes without damaging them. Most of the donors nodded politely, asked surface-level questions, and moved on to the wine and appetizers. But one man stayed. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair styled perfectly, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Isla made in 3 months. He had the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers, sharp jawline, intense dark eyes that seemed to actually focus on what she was saying rather than looking through her the way wealthy people usually did. "That's fascinating," he said when the others had drifted away. "The idea that you can see what the artist intended centuries ago, that you're having a conversation across time. That's exactly what it feels like," Isla said, surprised by his genuine interest. "Like I'm collaborating with someone who's been dead for 400 years. I'm just trying to honor their original vision. I'm Dominic." He extended his hand. "Dominic Ashford." Isla shook his hand, not recognizing the name, not understanding the way his mouth quirked slightly when she didn't react. Isla Moreau. I work in the restoration department. I gathered that, he said, and his smile seemed genuine. Tell me, what made you want to do this kind of work? They talked for an hour. He asked questions that suggested he was actually listening, not just waiting for his turn to talk. He wanted to know about her process, her training, what it felt like to reveal something beautiful that had been hidden. She found herself relaxing, forgetting that he was clearly wealthy and she was clearly not. Just enjoying a conversation with someone who seemed to care about what she cared about. Can I take you to dinner? He asked when the event was winding down. I'd love to hear more about your work. Isla hesitated. She didn't date much, didn't have time for it, wasn't particularly interested in the kind of men who usually asked her out. Just dinner, Dominic said, reading her hesitation. I promise I'm not a serial killer or anything creepy. I just find what you do genuinely interesting, and I'd like to continue this conversation somewhere without terrible wine and cheese that's been sitting out too long. She laughed, despite herself. Okay, just dinner. That dinner turned into a second date, then a third, then late-night phone calls where they talked until 2 a.m. about everything and nothing, then weekends spent at galleries and museums. Dominic asking her opinion on pieces Isla, slowly realizing that he wasn't just interested in art. He was interested in her. It took 3 dates before she Googled him and discovered that Dominic Ashford was the CEO of Ashford Technologies, a company his grandfather had founded that was now worth billions, that his family was New York royalty, old money mixed with new innovation, the kind of people who appeared in the society pages and had buildings named after them. She almost broke it off right there. Does it matter? Dominic asked, when she confronted him about not mentioning he was a billionaire. I didn't want you to see the money before you saw me. Everyone else in my world only sees what I'm worth, not who I am. You're the first person in years who's talked to me like I'm just a regular person. You're not a regular person, though, Isla said. You're from a completely different world. I grew up in Queens, in a 1-bedroom apartment. My mom cleaned houses. I eat cereal for dinner half the time because it's cheap. We don't make sense. Maybe that's exactly why we do make sense. Dominic took her hands. I'm so tired of people who care about the wrong things. You care about art and legacy and honoring the past. You care about doing good work. You care about real things. That's what I want in my life. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. She fell hard and fast, tumbling into the kind of love that felt like finally finding something she didn't know she'd been missing. Dominic was attentive and thoughtful, remembering small details she mentioned, sending her books about art conservation. He thought she'd like showing up at her studio apartment with takeout when she was working late. He introduced her to his world slowly. Dinners at restaurants where the menu didn't have prices, weekend trips to his family's estate in the Hamptons, gallery openings where everyone knew his name, and he seemed proud to have her there, proud to introduce her to colleagues and friends, proud to explain what she did, proud to be with someone who existed outside his usual social circle. 6 months into their relationship, he took her to a small Italian restaurant in the West Village, the kind of place that looked unassuming from the outside, but was impossible to get reservations at. Over tiramisu, he pulled out a small velvet box. I know this is fast, he said. I know we come from different worlds, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You make me want to be better. You make me care about things that matter. You make me feel like myself, instead of just being what everyone expects me to be. He opened the box to reveal a ring that was beautiful in its simplicity. Not ostentatious, not designed to impress, just a perfect diamond that caught the light and held it. Marry me, Isla. Build a life with me. Show me that real things matter more than all the superficial garbage I've been drowning in my whole life. She said yes through tears, overwhelmed by the feeling that fairy tales could actually happen, that Cinderella stories weren't just fiction, that love really could bridge any divide. The warning signs were there, small enough to ignore at the time. His mother Vivian's cool politeness when they first met, the way her eyes traveled over Isla's off-the-rack dress with barely concealed disdain. His sister Blair's pointed questions about Isla's background, her family, her education, all phrased like friendly curiosity, but landing like interrogation. His brother Julian's overly familiar way of speaking to her, like she, was already less than, already something he could treat casually. But Dominic brushed off her concerns. "They're just protective," he said. "They've seen a lot of people try to get close to our family for the wrong reasons. Once they get to know you, they'll love you." Isla wanted to believe him. The wedding was planned by Vivian, who took over the moment the engagement was announced. Every suggestion Isla made was politely dismissed, replaced with something more appropriate, more fitting for an Ashford family wedding. The guest list ballooned from the intimate gathering Isla wanted to over 300 people she'd never met. The venue changed from a garden to the Plaza Hotel. Her simple dress preference was replaced by a designer gown that cost more than her entire yearly salary. "Don't you want to look the part?" Vivian asked, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "This is your moment to show everyone that you belong in this family." The wedding was beautiful and cold, like an ice sculpture. Hundreds of people who came to see the Ashford heir marry the nobody from Queens, who whispered behind programs about how unusual it was, how unexpected, how interesting that Dominic had chosen someone so outside their world. Isla stood at the altar in a dress that didn't feel like hers, surrounded by flowers she hadn't chosen, speaking vows in front of people who didn't know her, and told herself this was just nerves, just the normal anxiety of a big life change. Dominic held her hands and said, "I do like he meant it." She believed him. The honeymoon was 2 weeks in Italy, and for those 2 weeks everything felt right again. Just the two of them, exploring ancient churches and eating pasta, and making love in hotel rooms overlooking the Mediterranean. Dominic was attentive and present, and seemed genuinely happy. "This is what our life will be like," he promised her. "Just us against the world." But the moment they returned to New York, everything changed. They moved into the Ashford family's Fifth Avenue penthouse, a sprawling apartment that occupied 3 floors and felt more like a museum than a home. Vivian lived there too, had lived there since her husband died 5 years earlier, and made it clear that this was still her domain. "Isla, dear," Vivian said on their first morning back, "we have a family breakfast every Sunday at 9. It's tradition. I trust you'll be appropriately dressed." "Of course," Isla said, wanting to make a good impression. That first Sunday, she came down in a simple dress, clean and modest, thinking she looked appropriate for a family breakfast. Vivian's eyes swept over her with the precision of a surgeon identifying a tumor. "How charming," she said, very casual. "I suppose we'll have to get you properly situated with a stylist who understands what's appropriate for family functions." Blair smirked into her mimosa. Julian's eyes traveled over Isla in a way that made her skin crawl. Dominic said nothing. That was the first moment Isla realized something fundamental had shifted. The man who had been her partner, her defender, her champion, seemed to disappear the moment they were around his family. In their place was this stranger who wouldn't meet her eyes, who let his mother's criticism land without comment, who acted like Isla was a problem to be managed rather than a wife to be cherished. Over the following weeks, the transformation accelerated. Vivian began assigning Isla tasks around the apartment. Small things at first, organizing events, managing household staff, coordinating with caterers. But the tasks came with constant criticism, constant correction, constant reminders that Isla didn't understand how things were done in their world. When the Ashfords hosted dinner parties, Isla found herself more servant than hostess, fetching drinks and clearing plates, while Vivian entertained guests and Dominic discussed business. "She really should learn proper entertaining," Blair said at one such dinner, her phone out, recording Isla carrying plates. "This is painful to watch. All that clomping around like she's still working some museum event instead of living in high society." The guests laughed, polite and vicious. Dominic sat at the head of the table and said nothing. Isla tried to talk to him about it that night, after everyone had left. After she'd cleaned up while the family retired to their rooms. "Your sister is cruel to me," she said quietly. "Your mother treats me like staff, and you just sit there and let it happen." Dominic was scrolling through his phone, barely listening. "You're being too sensitive. They're just trying to help you adjust. This is a different world than you're used to. You need to learn." "I need you to defend me," Isla said. "I need you to be my husband. I need you to stop making everything so difficult." Dominic snapped, finally looking up. Do you know how hard this adjustment has been for them? Accepting someone from your background into this family? The least you could do is try to fit in instead of constantly complaining. The words hit her like a slap. My background, she repeated slowly. You know what I mean. You're not used to this level of expectation. It's going to take time. He went back to his phone. The conversation over. Isla stood there in the bedroom they now rarely shared. Dominic, having started sleeping in his office most nights, claiming work, kept him busy, and felt the first real cracks forming in the foundation of everything she'd believed about their relationship. The months that followed were a masterclass in slow erosion, each day bringing new small cruelties, new moments of dismissal, new evidence that the man she'd married had been a performance, and this cold stranger was the reality. Vivian criticized everything, the way Isla dressed, walked, spoke, smiled. Nothing was ever quite right, quite appropriate, quite good enough for an Ashford. Blair documented Isla's mistakes on social media, posting videos and photos to her hundreds of thousands of followers. Look at the new addition to the family, trying so hard. The comments were brutal, mocking, dissecting everything from Isla's appearance to her background. Julian made inappropriate comments when no one else was around, letting his hand linger on her waist, making suggestions about spending time together, treating her like she was available simply because she wasn't worthy of respect. And Dominic allowed all of it. He stopped sleeping in their room entirely, stopped asking about her day, stopped touching her, except for the rare nights when he'd been drinking and would come to her room wanting sex but not intimacy, using her body but never meeting her eyes. Isla tried to maintain her work at the museum, but Vivian made it increasingly difficult. There were family obligations that conflicted with her schedule, events she was required to attend, expectations that her priority should be supporting Dominic's career, not pursuing her own. Eventually, she reduced her hours to part-time, then to consultant work, then to nothing, because it was easier than fighting every single day about where she should be and what she should be doing. She lost herself piece by piece. The woman who had been passionate and skilled and certain of her value slowly disappeared, replaced by someone who measured every word, every action, every breath to avoid criticism that came regardless. But then, something happened that changed everything. 4 months into the marriage, Isla woke up nauseous. She ignored it at first, stress manifesting physically, nothing unusual. But when it persisted for 2 weeks, when her period was late, when she took a test in the bathroom of a Starbucks, because she couldn't bear to do it in the apartment where nothing was truly private, she saw 2 pink lines. That meant everything was about to get infinitely more complicated. She was pregnant. For 3 days, she carried the secret alone, terrified to tell Dominic, terrified of how his family would react, terrified of bringing a child into this cold, beautiful prison. But there was also something else, a small spark of hope. Maybe this would change things. Maybe a baby would remind Dominic of what mattered. Maybe becoming parents would bring them back to each other. She decided to tell him at the gala. Ashford Technologies was celebrating 25 years, a massive event at the Plaza Hotel with over 500 guests. Investors, business partners, politicians, media. The kind of event where appearances were everything, and the family would be on full display. Vivienne selected Isla's dress personally, a green silk thing that somehow managed to be both too revealing and completely unflattering. It highlighted every imperfection, made her skin look sallow under the ballroom lights, fit awkwardly across her chest. Perfect, Vivian had said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You'll certainly make an impression. Isla stood in front of the mirror the night of the gala and barely recognized herself. 4 months pregnant, though not showing yet, wearing a dress designed to humiliate her, preparing to spend an evening watching her husband pretend she didn't exist while his family reminded everyone she didn't belong. But she had the pregnancy test in her clutch, physical proof of the life growing inside her. She would find a moment alone with Dominic, would tell him about the baby, would hope that this news would break through whatever wall had grown between them. The gala was everything she expected, and worse. Hundreds of beautiful people in expensive clothes, drinking champagne that cost more per bottle than Isla used to make in a week, discussing business and politics and social matters that she was never quite included in. Isla stood beside Dominic during the greeting portion, smiling as he introduced her to colleagues who looked past her immediately, who addressed all their comments to him, who treated her like an accessory that didn't speak. "Where did you find her again?" someone's wife asked Dominic, loud enough for Isla to hear. "She looks so out of place." "A charity event," Dominic replied, the word somehow making Isla herself sound like charity rather than someone working at one. Laughter rippled through their circle, polite and pointed. Isla's cheeks burned, but she kept her smile fixed in place. Just a few more hours, then she could tell him about the baby. Then things would change. Blair appeared at Isla's elbow with a champagne flute, pressing it into her hand, despite Isla trying to refuse. "You look like you need this," Blair said sweetly, her phone already out. "Try not to spill it on yourself this time. The cameras are everywhere tonight." Isla set the glass down on a passing tray, her stomach churning with morning sickness that had started appearing at all hours. The dinner portion was endless. Course after course of food Isla couldn't eat. Speeches praising the Ashford family's contributions. Vivienne talking about legacy and responsibility. Dominic thanking everyone for their support. Isla sat beside him at the head table and might as well have been invisible. After dinner, an orchestra began playing. Couples moved to the dance floor, elegant pairs who had known each other for generations. Old money waltzing with old money, maintaining connections that stretched back decades. Isla watched Dominic speak with a woman in red, someone's daughter from another tech. Family, laughing at something she said with a warmth he never showed his wife. Something inside her cracked, watching him perform charm for a stranger, watching him become animated and present in a way he hadn't been with her in months. She made a decision born of desperation and foolish hope. She walked onto the dance floor and approached her husband, this man she had, married believing love could survive anything, and touched his arm gently. "Dance with me." Dominic turned, surprise flickering across his face before hardening into something colder. Around them, conversations paused. People turned to watch. The orchestra continued playing, oblivious to the moment unfolding on their floor. "I don't think that's a good idea," Dominic said, his voice low. "Please," Isla said, her hand moving to her stomach instinctively, protectively. "I need to talk to you. Just one dance." Something in her tone must have suggested she wouldn't leave quietly, because Dominic took her hand with visible reluctance and pulled her into a stiff embrace. They moved to the music, his body rigid, his eyes scanning the room for rescue. Isla tried to find something in his face, some remnant of the man who had proposed to her, who had promised her the world, who had sworn nothing would come between them. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly, trying to speak without others hearing. "Something important, something that changes everything." "Not here," Dominic said through clenched teeth. "You're making a scene. I'm 4 months pregnant." The words came out in a rush, desperate and hopeful and terrified all at once. Dominic stopped moving. His hand dropped from her waist. His face went carefully blank. The expression she'd learned meant he was about to say something terrible. "What did you say?" "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. I wanted to tell you somewhere private, but you're never alone anymore, and I thought maybe this would be good news. Maybe this would remind you of why we got married in the first place." Around them, people were watching now. The nearby couples had stopped dancing, sensing drama, phones coming out, cameras pointing their direction. "You thought getting pregnant would fix this," Dominic said, his voice rising slightly. "You thought trapping me with a baby would make me forget that this entire marriage was a mistake." The word hung in the air like smoke. Mistake. Isla felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "I didn't trap you. We're married. I'm your wife." "You're a mistake I made," Dominic said, louder now, making sure she heard him, making sure everyone heard him. "I thought you were different. I thought you could fit into this world, but you're just a project that failed, and now you're trying to make it permanent." The ballroom was going quiet now, conversations dying, the orchestra playing softer. Everyone's attention pulled toward the drama unfolding on the dance floor. "Dominic, please," Isla whispered, tears starting to form. "Don't do this here." "Where else should I do it?" he asked, his voice cold enough to freeze blood. "Where else should I finally say what everyone has been too polite to say out loud?" You don't belong here. You've never belonged here. You are the worst mistake of my life, and I'd rather dance with a stranger off the street than pretend you belong in this family." The words landed like physical blows. Isla felt phones flashing, felt hundreds of eyes on her, felt the world tilting sideways. Someone laughed. Then someone else. Then the laughter spread like a virus, polite and vicious and absolutely destroying. Blair was recording, her phone held high, making sure to capture every moment of her brother's public destruction of his wife. Isla stood there, her hand still on her stomach, protecting the baby from words that couldn't be taken back, and something fundamental shifted inside her. She had spent 4 months making herself smaller, 4 months accepting cruelty as if she deserved it, 4 months believing that if she just tried harder, adjusted better, fit in more completely, they might finally accept her. But standing here, publicly humiliated, carrying a child this man had just called a mistake, watching him perform cruelty for an audience, she finally understood the truth. She had never been the problem. They were. Isla smiled. Not a real smile, but something colder, something that had been building beneath the surface for months. She smiled like the words hadn't just shattered her, like she wasn't dying inside while everyone watched. Then she walked to the microphone at the front of the ballroom. The room went completely silent. "Excuse me," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I know you're all here to celebrate Ashford Technologies, but I think there's something you should know about the family you're investing in." "Isla." Dominic's voice came from behind her, warning, "Don't." She turned to look at him, this man who had promised to love her, who had destroyed her peace, who had just called their unborn child a mistake in front of everyone who mattered to him. "You're right, Dominic. I am a mistake. Your mistake. You married someone real, someone who actually cared about you, someone who believed in the person you pretended to be. That was my mistake, believing you were that person." She turned back to the microphone, to the crowd of wealthy elite who had watched her humiliation like entertainment. "For the past 4 months, I've lived with the Ashford family. I've watched how they operate. I've learned what legacy really means to them. And I think you should all know what kind of people you're supporting." Vivian's face had gone white. This family treats people as disposable. They build their empire on cruelty and call it strength. Vivian Ashford has been embezzling from the family foundation for years, funneling money into offshore accounts while pretending to support charitable causes. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "I found the documents by accident, filed away in places they thought no one would look. I was going to stay silent. I was going to be the good wife who kept family secrets. But you know what? I'm done protecting people who never protected me." Security was moving toward her now, but Isla kept talking. "I'm 4 months pregnant with Dominic Ashford's child, a child he just called a mistake in front of all of you, a child who will never know a father who mistakes power for strength and cruelty for legacy. This baby deserves better than this family, and so do I." She set down the microphone and walked off the stage, through the crowd that parted, like water, through the grand entrance, down the marble steps into the night. Behind her, chaos erupted, voices rising. Vivian's sharp commands, Blair's excited chatter, media representatives suddenly very interested, security trying to restore order to a moment that had just exploded into scandal. Isla kept walking. She had no car, no ride arranged, no plan beyond getting as far from that building as possible. She walked in her green silk dress and heels that weren't made for distance, walked until her feet bled, until her body trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline, and the kind of rage that felt like freedom. She walked for hours, through neighborhoods that went from wealthy to working class, through streets that were familiar from her old life before Dominic, before the mansion, before she'd lost herself trying to become someone she was never meant to be. Rain started falling around midnight, soft at first, then harder, soaking through the expensive silk, washing away makeup and pretense, and whatever remained of the woman who had walked into that gala still hoping for mercy. Isla's legs finally gave out on a street corner in Brooklyn, not far from where she'd grown up. She collapsed on a bench outside a closed bookstore, her dress ruined, her feet bleeding, her heart empty of everything except the cold certainty that she could never go back. Her phone buzzed, Dominic calling, then Vivienne, then numbers she didn't recognize. She turned it off and threw it in a trash can, cutting the last connection to the life that had just imploded. The rain fell harder, and Isla sat there laughing, not from happiness but something wilder, something that tasted like terror and liberation in equal measure. She had finally told the truth. She had finally fought back, and now she had absolutely nothing except a baby growing inside her and the clothes on her back. A light came on inside the bookstore. The door opened, and a woman appeared, older, maybe 60, with kind eyes and a raincoat. "Are you all right?" the woman asked, though clearly Isla was not all right. "I don't know," Isla said honestly. The woman studied her for a long moment, taking in the expensive ruined dress, the bare feet, the way Isla was shaking from cold and shock. "Come inside," the woman said. "You can't stay out here in the rain." "I don't have any money," Isla said. "I can't pay you for anything." "I didn't ask if you could pay," the woman replied gently. "I asked you to come inside." Isla stood on unsteady legs and followed this stranger into the warm bookstore that smelled like paper and possibility. The woman introduced herself as Miriam Chen. She made tea and gave Isla dry clothes and asked no questions beyond whether she was hurt, whether she needed medical attention, whether she was safe. When Isla finally stopped shaking enough to speak, she told the abbreviated version. The marriage that had been a lie. The family that had destroyed her. The pregnancy. The public confrontation. The fact that she had nowhere to go and nothing left except the baby and her training and a rage that burned cold and pure. Miriam listened without judgment. "You can stay here tonight," she said when Isla finished. "Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. But tonight, you need to rest." "Why are you helping me?" Isla asked. "You don't know me." "I know enough," Miriam replied. "I know what it looks like when someone has survived something terrible. I run a women's shelter 3 blocks from here. I've seen 100 versions of your story. Wealthy man, poor woman, family that treats her like contamination, escape that feels impossible. The details change, but the shape is always the same." "I'm not a victim," Isla said, defensive. "No," Miriam agreed. "You're a survivor. There's a difference. Victims stay trapped. Survivors get out. You got out. Now, you have to figure out what comes next." Isla spent that night in a small room above the bookstore, in a bed that wasn't expensive but felt safer than anywhere she'd slept in months, and she made a promise to the life growing inside her. "We're going to survive this. We're going to build something real. We're going to prove that we never needed them in the first place." She didn't know yet that survival would require more courage than she knew she possessed. She didn't know that the worst was still coming. And she didn't know that sometimes the only way to build something new is to let everything else burn completely to ash. But she was about to learn. The next morning, Isla woke to sunlight streaming through simple cotton curtains and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back with the weight of a building collapsing. She was alone, pregnant, homeless, estranged from the only family she'd married into, and having spectacularly destroyed any chance of reconciliation by exposing their secrets to 500 witnesses. Her body ached from walking in heels, from sleeping in unfamiliar positions, from carrying stress that had nowhere to go except into muscle tension. Her feet were bandaged where Miriam had cleaned and wrapped them the night before. She needed to go back to the penthouse, not because she wanted to, but because everything she owned existed inside those walls. Her documents, her few personal belongings, the small amount of savings she'd managed to keep separate from Dominic's accounts. But first, she needed to understand what damage she'd done. Miriam's bookstore had a computer. Isla sat down and searched her own name. The results were immediate and devastating. Videos of the gala had gone viral. Clips of Dominic saying, "You are the worst mistake of my life," had been shared millions of times. Her response at the microphone was everywhere. News outlets were covering it as a scandal. Ashford Technology's stock had dropped 12% overnight. Business analysts were questioning Vivienne's financial management. The family foundation was facing calls for investigation, and Isla's face was plastered across every gossip site and news platform, identified as the nobody from Queens who married into the Ashford family, and destroyed them from the inside. The comments were brutal. Gold digger got what she deserved. She trapped him with a pregnancy and thought she could blackmail the family. This is what happens when rich men marry below their station. But there were other comments too. Good for her for exposing their corruption. That man humiliated his pregnant wife in public. She had every right to fight back. I hope she takes them for everything. Isla closed the laptop, her hands shaking. It's bad, Miriam said from the doorway. Not a question. It's everywhere, Isla replied. I'm everywhere. Everyone has an opinion about who I am and what I did, and whether I'm a victim or a villain. Does their opinion change what you know to be true? Miriam asked. No. Then, it doesn't matter what they think. It only matters what you do next. I need to go back to the apartment, Isla said. Get my things before they change the locks or destroy everything out of spite. I'll drive you, Miriam offered. You shouldn't go alone. An hour later, they pulled up to the Fifth Avenue building where Isla had lived for 4 months that felt like 4 years. The doorman's face flickered with recognition and something that might have been pity when he saw her. Is the family home? Isla asked. They left early this morning, the doorman said quietly. I was told you're not allowed back inside. By who? Mrs. Ashford Sr. I still live here, Isla said. Legally, that's still my home. The doorman looked uncomfortable. I have my orders, miss. I'm sorry. Isla felt rage building in her chest, hot and acidic. Let me speak to Dominic. He's not taking calls. Then, let me get my personal belongings, my identification, my documents, things that belong to me. The doorman hesitated, then made a phone call. After a tense conversation, he hung up. You have 20 minutes. Julian Ashford will supervise to make sure you only take personal items. Of course they would send Julian, the brother who treated her like property, to watch her pack up the remnants of her life. Miriam squeezed her hand. I'll be right here waiting. 20 minutes. Get what you need and get out. Isla rode the elevator up to the penthouse with Julian, who stood too close and smiled in a way that made her skin crawl. This is quite the mess you've made, he said conversationally. Mother is absolutely furious. Dominic is having a complete breakdown. The company's in chaos. All because you couldn't handle being part of our world. All because your family is toxic, Isla corrected. All because you treat people like they're disposable. You were disposable, Julian said simply. You were a phase Dominic went through. He would have gotten bored eventually. You just accelerated the timeline. The elevator doors opened into the penthouse that had never felt like home. Vivian was waiting in the living room. She looked older than Isla remembered, her perfect facade cracked by stress, her eyes cold with fury. You have 20 minutes to collect your personal belongings, Vivian said. Nothing that could be considered family property. Nothing of value. Julian will ensure you don't steal anything. I never stole anything from you, Isla said quietly. You're the one who's been stealing from your own foundation. Vivian's smile was vicious. You have no proof of that. Whatever you think you saw, it's gone now. And if you ever try to repeat those accusations, I will destroy you more thoroughly than you can imagine. You've already destroyed me, Isla replied. What else is left? Your freedom, Vivian said simply. You see, we've done some digging into your little performance last night. You made some very serious accusations about financial impropriety. Accusations you can't prove. That's defamation, slander. We could have you arrested. Isla felt ice forming in her stomach. You're bluffing. Am I? Vivian pulled out her phone and showed Isla a document. These are papers for a civil lawsuit. Defamation, breach of contract, theft of proprietary information. We're prepared to file these today, unless you agree to our terms. What terms? You sign a non-disclosure agreement. You never speak about this family again. You never contact Dominic. You never claim that child is his. In exchange, we don't press charges, and we give you a small settlement to disappear. How small? $50,000. Isla laughed, the sound harsh in the elegant living room. You think I'll give up my child's right to support for $50,000? That child will never be acknowledged as an Ashford, Vivian said coldly. If you try to claim paternity, We will fight you with every resource we have. We will prove you were sleeping with other men. We will paint you as a liar and a whore who tried to trap our family. We will make sure you never work in this city again. You're a monster, Isla whispered. I'm a mother protecting her son from a mistake, Vivian corrected. Dominic should never have married you. You were a project, an experiment in slumming. It failed. Now we're cleaning up the mess. Julian was watching all of this with amusement, his phone out, recording. I need my documents, Isla said, refusing to engage further. My passport, my birth certificate, my professional credentials. Julian will supervise, Vivian said. You have 15 minutes now. The clock is ticking. Isla walked to the bedroom she'd barely slept in, Julian following close behind. She packed one small bag with clothes, documents, the few photographs she had of her mother. She took nothing that could be connected to the Ashford name or fortune. When she emerged, Vivian was waiting with papers already prepared. Sign these, she said. End this cleanly. Take the money and disappear. Isla read through the documents carefully. They were exactly as brutal as Vivian had described. She would give up all rights to contact Dominic, all claims of paternity, all ability to speak about the family or the marriage. In exchange, she got $50,000 and her freedom from prosecution. She had no lawyer, no money to hire one, no leverage except the truth, which Vivian had already made clear would be twisted into lies if Isla tried to use it. If I don't sign, Isla asked, we file criminal charges. You'll be arrested for defamation, possibly fraud. You'll give birth in a prison hospital. Child services will take your baby. Is that really the future you want? Isla looked at this woman who had spent months making her life miserable, who was now threatening her unborn child, who had perfected the art of cruelty dressed as concern. She signed the papers because she had no choice, because protecting her baby mattered more than pride, because sometimes survival meant swallowing poison and hoping you were strong enough to metabolize it. Vivian smiled as she took the signed documents. Smart girl. The money will be transferred to your account by end of business today. If you ever break this agreement, we will sue you for every penny and make sure you never recover. One more thing, Isla said, her voice steady despite the rage shaking through her. When this child grows up and asks about her father, I'm going to tell her the truth, that he was a coward who let his family destroy the people he claimed to love, that he chose comfort over courage, that he was exactly the kind of man she should never let into her life. You'll tell her nothing, Vivian said. You signed away that right. I signed away my right to contact him, Isla corrected. I didn't sign away my right to raise my daughter with honesty. And trust me, Vivian, she will know exactly what kind of family she comes from. She'll know to be better than all of you. Isla walked out of the penthouse carrying one bag and a heart full of rage that felt like fuel. Miriam was waiting in the car. How did it go? She asked. I signed their papers, Isla said. Took their money. Agreed never to contact them again. And how do you feel about that? Like I just made a deal with the devil, Isla replied. But also like I finally understand that the only way out of hell is through. That evening, sitting in Miriam's office at the women's shelter, Isla made a plan. She had $50,000. It wasn't enough to live on forever, but it was enough to start. She had her credentials as an art conservator and authenticator. She had her expertise. She had contacts in the art world who knew her work was excellent, regardless of her personal drama. I need to disappear, she told Miriam. Change my name. Start over somewhere they can't find me. Or, Miriam suggested, you stay here and build something so successful that they have to watch you thrive from a distance. The best revenge isn't disappearing. It's becoming so undeniably excellent that your existence is a constant reminder of what they lost. Isla thought about that. I'm going to have a baby in 5 months, she said. I can't exactly build an empire while pregnant and broke. You'd be surprised what desperate women can accomplish, Miriam said. I've seen women leave abusive husbands with nothing and build entire businesses from scratch. I've seen women go from homeless to homeowners in 3 years. I've seen resilience that would break most people. You have something they didn't have. You have real skills. You have expertise people will pay for. Use it. Over the following weeks, Isla did exactly that. She set up a simple website offering art authentication and conservation consultation services. She reached out to galleries and auction houses she'd worked with before, carefully explaining that she was going independent. She took on small jobs, authenticating pieces, consulting on restoration, projects, building a reputation separate from the Ashford drama. The work was slow at first, but Isla had something that many consultants lacked. She was genuinely excellent at what she did. When a small auction house hired her to authenticate a painting they suspected might be a lost work by a minor, Dutch master Isla spent 3 days analyzing brushstrokes, pigment composition, canvas weave patterns. Her conclusion was definitive. It was genuine, worth approximately $200,000 instead of the $5,000 they'd estimated. The auction house was thrilled. They paid her consultation fee and recommended her to others. Word spread in the small, interconnected world of art authentication. The woman who had been involved in the Ashford scandal was also the woman who had an almost supernatural ability to determine authenticity. More work came, bigger projects, better pay. 5 months into her independence, Isla gave birth to a daughter in a public hospital, surrounded by Miriam and other women from the shelter who had become her chosen family. She named her Nova. New star, new beginning. Holding her daughter for the first time, Isla made a promise. "You will never doubt your worth," she whispered. "You will never let anyone make you small. You will know you are loved completely, not for what you provide, but for who you are." Nova looked at her with Dominic's eyes, but none of his weakness. Isla's maternity leave was 2 weeks. She couldn't afford more. She brought Nova to consultations, the baby strapped to her chest while she examined paintings and wrote authentication reports. Some clients were put off by the unprofessionalism. Others found it charming, this woman so dedicated to her craft that she worked with an infant attached to her. When Nova was 3 months old, Isla authenticated a painting that changed everything. A wealthy collector had purchased what was labeled as a minor 19th century landscape at an estate sale for $15,000. Something about it bothered him. He hired Isla to investigate. She spent a week analyzing every detail. The brushwork was extraordinary. The pigments were consistent with a much earlier period. The signature was partially obscured, but when she used infrared imaging, it revealed something remarkable. A Caravaggio signature. She ran every test she could think of. Carbon dating of the canvas, chemical analysis of the pigments, comparison with known Caravaggio works. Everything supported the conclusion that this landscape, hidden beneath centuries of grime and obscurity, was actually a lost work by one of the masters, worth approximately $80 million. The authentication made international news. Isla's name was suddenly attached to one of the most significant art discoveries in decades. Major auction houses started calling. Museums wanted her consultation. Collectors began seeking her expertise specifically. Her rates tripled, then tripled again. Within a year of leaving the Ashford family, Isla had built a thriving independent authentication business. She hired assistants. She opened a small office. She started teaching workshops on authentication techniques. Within 2 years, she opened Moreau Gallery, specializing in recovered and restored works. The gallery had a mission beyond profit. She created a training program for women from disadvantaged backgrounds, teaching them conservation and authentication skills, giving them the kind of opportunity she'd once had. And she did it all with Nova at her side, raising her daughter to understand that worth came from within. That love was demonstrated through action. That family was built through choice, not obligation. The Ashford name appeared in the news occasionally. Dominic stepping down from his CEO position. Vivian facing investigation for foundation mismanagement. The company struggling with scandals and declining stock value. Isla didn't pay attention. She was too busy building something real. By the time Nova turned 5, Moreau Gallery was internationally recognized. Isla had published a book on authentication techniques that became required reading in art conservation programs. She'd been featured in profiles about successful entrepreneurs, though she carefully avoided discussing her personal life. The past felt distant, like something that had happened to a different person. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, Dominic Ashford walked into her gallery. Isla was reviewing a provenance report when her assistant Marcus knocked on her office door. "There's someone here to see you," he said, his expression suggesting the visitor was unexpected. "He won't say what it's about, but he's insisting it's personal." "I don't take personal visits during business hours," Isla replied without looking up. "If it's not about art authentication or gallery business, please ask them to leave." Marcus hesitated. "It's Dominic Ashford." The name hit her like a physical blow. 5 years. She hadn't seen him, hadn't heard his voice, hadn't thought about him beyond the occasional news article about his company's decline. And now he was here, in her gallery, in the space she'd built from nothing after he'd destroyed everything. "Tell him I'm not available," Isla said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I did. He says he'll wait. He's been in the lobby for 2 hours. Then he can wait longer." "I'm not interested in speaking to him." Marcus nodded and left, but 20 minutes later, he returned. "He's still there. He's starting to make other clients uncomfortable. Should I call security?" Isla looked out through her office window at the gallery floor below. She could see him, this man who had once been her husband, sitting on one of the viewing benches, looking diminished, in a way that had nothing to do with his clothes and everything to do with how he carried himself. He looked older, tired, like someone who'd been hollowed out and was still figuring out how to function without the parts he'd lost. "I'll handle it," Isla said, standing. "Give me 5 minutes, then, if he's not gone, call security." She walked down the stairs to the gallery floor, her heels clicking on polished concrete, her presence commanding in a way it never had been during their marriage. She wore a simple black dress that cost a fraction of what the Ashfords used to spend on her wardrobe, but fit her perfectly because she'd chosen it herself. Her hair was pulled back, professional and elegant. She looked like exactly what she was: successful, powerful, completely in control of her own life. Dominic stood when he saw her approaching. His eyes widened slightly, taking in the transformation. This wasn't the broken woman he'd thrown out 5 years ago. This was someone entirely different. "You need to leave," Isla said without preamble. "You're not welcome here." "Isla, please. I just need 5 minutes. 5 minutes to explain." "There's nothing to explain. We signed papers. I agreed never to contact you. That agreement works both ways. If you don't leave, I'll have security remove you, and I'll file a restraining order." "I know I have no right to be here," Dominic said quickly, desperately. "I know I destroyed everything. But please, just let me say what I came to say. Then I'll leave and never bother you again." Isla studied him, seeing the desperation in his eyes, the way his hands shook. Slightly, the evidence of someone barely holding themselves together. "You have 3 minutes, she said. "In my office, not here. I won't have you disrupting my business." They walked to her office in silence. Dominic's eyes swept over the gallery, seeing the art on display, the professionalism of the setup, the evidence of her success. In her office, Isla sat behind her desk, putting physical distance and professional authority between them. Dominic stood awkwardly, like he didn't know whether he was allowed to sit. 2 minutes and 40 seconds, Isla said, checking her watch. "I'm sorry," Dominic said, the words tumbling out. "I'm so sorry for everything, for how I treated you, for believing my family's lies, for destroying our marriage, for what I said at the gala. I was a coward, and you deserve so much better than what I gave you." "Okay," Isla said neutrally. "Is that all?" "No. I found out the truth. About my mother framing you, about the corporate secrets accusation being completely fabricated, about how they orchestrated everything to get rid of you. I confronted her before she died, and she admitted it all. You were innocent, and I condemned you without question." "I know I was innocent," Isla replied. "I've always known. Your apology doesn't change anything." "I also know about the baby," Dominic continued. "I saw photos. She has my eyes. She's mine, isn't she?" Isla's expression went cold. "I have a daughter named Nova. She's mine. Only mine. You signed away any claim to her 5 years ago." "I didn't know she existed," Dominic protested. "If I had known you were pregnant, I never would have let you leave." "Yes, you would have," Isla said quietly, "because letting me leave was easier than standing up to your family. You've always chosen the path of least resistance. That's who you are. I've changed, Dominic insisted. The last 5 years have destroyed everything I thought mattered. The company is gone. My family is scattered. My mother died hating me. I've lost everything, and I finally understand what I threw away when I lost you. You didn't throw me away, Isla corrected. I walked away. There's a difference. You didn't have the courage to leave, so I did it for both of us. I want to make it right, Dominic said. I want to be part of my daughter's life. I want to support you both. I want to prove I'm not the man I was. My daughter has everything she needs, Isla replied. She has a mother who loves her unconditionally. She has a community of people who show up for her. She's never once asked where her father is because I've made sure she knows she's complete without you. She deserves to know her father. She deserves to know a father who would protect her, Isla said. You've never proven you're that person. You abandoned her before she was born. Your name isn't on her birth certificate. You have no legal rights to her. And I will fight with everything I have to keep you away from her if you try to force contact. I'm not trying to force anything, Dominic said, his voice breaking. I'm asking, I'm begging. Please let me meet her. Let me try to be the father she deserves. Isla looked at him for a long moment, seeing genuine pain in his eyes, but also seeing the years of therapy Nova would need if she let this broken man into her life. Your 3 minutes are up, she said. Please, leave. If you contact me again, I'll file a restraining order. If you try to contact Nova through her school or her friends or any other avenue, I will prosecute you for harassment. Am I clear? Isla, please. Am I clear? She repeated, her voice hard. Yes, Dominic whispered. Good. Marcus will show you out. She turned back to her computer, dismissing him like he was a stranger who had taken up too much of her time. Dominic stood there for a moment, clearly wanting to say more, but finally he walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. I'm proud of what you've built, he said quietly. You became everything you were always capable of being. I'm sorry I tried to stop you. You didn't try to stop me, Isla said without looking up. You just got in the way. I went around you and kept building. That's the difference between us, Dominic. When I hit obstacles, I find another path. When you hit obstacles, you give up. He left without another word. Isla sat at her desk, her hands shaking now that he was gone, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to feel the emotions his presence had stirred up. Anger, disgust, small, traitorous flicker of satisfaction that he was suffering. Then she closed those feelings away and returned to work. But Dominic didn't stop. Over the following weeks, letters arrived at the gallery. Flowers were delivered. He tried to contact her through mutual acquaintances from the art world. He showed up at public events where he knew she'd be speaking. Each time, Isla had him removed. Each time she documented the contact for the restraining order she was preparing to file. Then he changed tactics. Instead of contacting Isla directly, he started a foundation. The Moreau Initiative, he called it, funding programs for women leaving abusive family situations, providing resources for single mothers, starting businesses, supporting art education for underprivileged children. He named it after her maiden name, the name she'd reclaimed when she left him. News articles appeared about Dominic Ashford's redemption arc, his attempts to make amends for past mistakes, his commitment to supporting causes his ex-wife championed. Isla read the articles with cold fury. He's using my name to rehabilitate his image, she told Miriam over coffee. He's turning my survival into his redemption story. What are you going to do about it? Miriam asked. Nothing, Isla said. Engaging with it gives him what he wants, attention and validation. The foundation is helping people. I won't shut that down just because I hate the man funding it. But I also won't acknowledge it, or him, and if Nova finds out about him, then I'll tell her the truth, Isla said, that her father is a man who destroyed her mother and is now trying to buy forgiveness, that good actions don't erase bad history, that she gets to decide for herself whether someone who abandoned her before she was born deserves space in her life. But Nova was 5 years old and perceptive in the way children are when they grow up watching their mother carefully. Mama, she asked one evening during dinner, why don't I have a daddy? Isla had been preparing for this question for years, but it still hit hard. You do have a father, she said carefully. Everyone has a biological father. Yours just isn't part of our lives. Why not? Because he made choices that meant he couldn't be the kind of father you deserve. So it's just you and me. And we're doing pretty great, don't you think? Nova considered this. Did he not want me? The question broke Isla's heart. He didn't know about you, she said, choosing honesty over comfort. And when he found out, it was too late. We'd already built our life without him, and I decided it was better to keep things the way they were. But what if I want to meet him? Then when you're older, when you can understand the whole story, we'll talk about it, Isla promised. But right now, you're 5. Right now your job is to be a kid and know you're loved completely. The rest can wait. Nova seemed satisfied with this answer. But 2 weeks later, she came home from school with questions. Riley's mom says my dad is on the news. Is that true? Isla's stomach dropped. What did Riley's mom say? That he's doing good stuff now, but he used to be mean to you. Is that true? Was he mean to you? Yes, Isla said, kneeling to be at Nova's eye level. He was mean to me when we were married. That's why we're not married anymore. But he's being nice now, Nova said. Riley's mom showed me. He's helping people. People can do good things and still not be good for us personally, Isla explained. Your father is trying to become a better person, and that's good. But that doesn't mean he gets to be part of our life. We're safe and happy, just the two of us, right? Nova nodded, but Isla could see the wheels turning in her daughter's mind, the questions forming that would only get more complicated as she got older. That night, Isla composed an email to Dominic through his foundation's contact page. Your public redemption campaign is affecting my daughter. She's hearing about you from classmates' parents. She's asking questions I shouldn't have to answer because you can't respect boundaries. If you actually care about her well-being like you claim, you'll stop using my name and story for your personal rehabilitation. This isn't about you. It never was. Stop making it about you. She sent it and felt slightly better, though she didn't expect it to change anything. But 3 days later, Dominic's foundation announced a name change. The Moreau Initiative became Second Chance Pathways, with a mission statement that made no mention of Dominic's personal story or motivations. It was a small concession, but it was something. If you're learning something from this story, I need you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These stories take hours to research and craft, and your support through likes and subscriptions helps me keep bringing you content that matters. Drop a comment telling me what you think so far. Are you Team Isla, or do you think Dominic deserves a second chance? I read every comment. Let's keep this conversation going. Time passed. Nova turned 6, then 7. The questions about her father became less frequent, but more pointed. She was smart enough to research on her own, to find old articles about the Gala scandal, to piece together a picture of who Dominic Ashford was and what he'd done. Isla, she said when she was 8 years old, I want to meet him. They were sitting in their living room, the home Isla had bought 3 years earlier, modest, by Ashford standards, but warm and filled with love in a way the penthouse never had been. Why? Isla asked, keeping her voice neutral. Because he's part of where I came from, Nova said with the logic of a child who'd been raised to think critically. You always tell me to understand things fully before making decisions. How can I decide how I feel about him if I've never met him? Isla wanted to say no, wanted to protect her daughter from potential disappointment and pain, but she'd also raised Nova to be brave, to ask questions, to make informed choices. If we do this, it happens on our terms, Isla said. Supervised, limited time, and if at any point you're uncomfortable, we leave immediately. This is about you getting information, not about giving him access to our lives. Understood. Understood, Nova agreed. Arranging the meeting took weeks. Lawyers were involved, parameters established, boundaries made crystal clear. One meeting, 2 hours maximum, in a neutral location with Isla present the entire time. Dominic agreed to everything instantly, desperately. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at a family counselor's office, neutral territory designed for difficult conversations. Isla dressed Nova carefully that morning, letting her daughter choose her own clothes, a statement of autonomy and control. Are you nervous? Isla asked. A little, Nova admitted. What if he's mean like he was to you? Then we leave, Isla promised, and you'll know exactly what kind of person he is. But Nova, I need you to understand something important. No matter what happens today, no matter what he says or how he acts, you are completely loved and completely whole, exactly as you are. He doesn't complete you. He doesn't define you. He's just someone who contributed biology. I'm the one who chose you every single day. I know, Mama, Nova said, hugging her. You're my real parent. He's just the question mark I'm filling in. They arrived at the counselor's office to find Dominic already there, sitting in the waiting room looking like he might throw up from nerves. He stood when he saw them, his eyes immediately going to Nova, drinking in every detail of the daughter he'd never met. Hi, he said, his voice shaking. I'm Dominic. It's so good to finally meet you. I'm Nova, she replied, polite but reserved. I know who you are. I Googled you. Despite the tension, Isla almost smiled. Her daughter had definitely inherited her directness. They moved into the counselor's office, a comfortable room with soft furniture and tissues strategically placed. The counselor, Dr. Patricia Reeves, had been briefed on the situation. Nova, Dr. Reeves said gently, this is your meeting. You can ask any questions you want, or we can just sit quietly. Whatever feels right to you. There's no pressure to perform or make anyone comfortable. This time is yours. Nova sat between Isla and the counselor, Dominic across from them, the distance both physical and symbolic. Why weren't you there when I was born? Nova asked, jumping straight to the hardest question. Dominic took a shaky breath. I didn't know you existed, he said. Your mother and I were separated before she knew she was pregnant. By the time I found out about you, years had passed. She'd built a life without me, and I had no legal right to intrude on that. But Mama says you were mean to her, Nova continued. Why were you mean to her if you loved her? Dominic's eyes flickered to Isla briefly, then back to Nova. I was a coward, he said, the word heavy with self-loathing. My family didn't approve of your mother because she came from a different background than we did. Instead of defending her, instead of protecting her, I let my family treat her badly. I was too weak to stand up for what was right. I chose comfort over courage, and that choice destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. Did you really say she was the worst mistake of your life? Nova asked. In front of all those people? Yes, Dominic whispered. I said that. It's the cruelest thing I've ever said to anyone, and I said it to the woman I was supposed to love and protect. I was trying to impress people who didn't matter, and in the process, I destroyed the one person who did. Mama isn't a mistake, Nova said fiercely. She's the best person in the whole world. I know, Dominic agreed. She's extraordinary. She survived everything I did to her and built something amazing. You're so lucky to have her as your mother. I am, Nova said. Are you sorry? Every single day, Dominic replied. I'm sorry for hurting your mother. I'm sorry for not being there when you were born. I'm sorry for missing 8 years of your life. I'm sorry for being the kind of man who let fear control his choices. I'm working on becoming someone different, but that doesn't undo what I did. Nova was quiet for a moment, processing. Do you want to be my dad now? The question hung in the air like a grenade. I want to be someone you can trust, Dominic said carefully. I want to be someone who shows up and keeps promises. I want to earn the right to be in your life, even in a small way. But I understand that might never happen, and that would be fair. I don't get to demand anything. I can only ask and respect whatever you decide. What would that look like, Nova asked, if you were in my life? Dominic glanced at Isla, who remained expressionless. Whatever you and your mother decide is appropriate, he said. Maybe letters sometimes, maybe meeting a few times a year in places like this, supervised, where you feel safe. Maybe nothing at all, if that's what you choose. You're in control here, Nova. Not me. Can I think about it? Nova asked. Of course, Dominic said. Take all the time you need. The meeting continued for another hour. Nova asked about Dominic's family, his work, his life now. He answered honestly, not hiding the failures or attempting to paint himself as better than he was. My company failed because it was built on my grandfather's corruption, he explained when she asked about Ashford Technologies. When that corruption was exposed, everything collapsed. I lost almost all the money. I work now, helping other businesses restructure and recover from failure. I'm good at it because I understand failure intimately. What about your mom and your brother and sister? Nova asked. My mother died 4 years ago, Dominic said. She never apologized for what she did to your mother. My sister changed her name and moved to Europe. We don't speak. My brother disappeared after stealing what was left of the family money. I haven't heard from him in 3 years. So you're alone, Nova observed. Yes, Dominic admitted. By choice and consequence. I destroyed my relationships through my own actions. I'm learning to live with that. That sounds sad, Nova said. It is, Dominic agreed, but it's also fair. I made choices, and these are the consequences. When the session ended, Dr. Reeves asked Nova how she felt. Confused, Nova said honestly. He seems nice now, but he was really mean to Mama. I don't know if people can change that much. People can change, Dr. Reeves said, but change takes years, not months. And you don't have to decide anything today. You can take time to think about what you want. In the parking lot, Dominic approached Isla carefully. Thank you for letting me meet her, he said. She's incredible. You've done an amazing job raising her. I know, Isla replied. I'm not asking for access or rights or anything you're not comfortable with, Dominic continued. But if she decides she wants some kind of relationship, even just occasional, letters, I promise I'll respect whatever boundaries you set. I'll never try to undermine you or confuse her about who her real parent is. Good, Isla said, because if you hurt her, if you disappoint her, if you make her feel even a fraction of what you made me feel, I will make sure you never see her again. Are we clear? Completely clear, Dominic said. Can I ask you something? No, Isla said. We're not friends. We're not co-parents. We're people with a complicated history who share DNA with the same child. That doesn't make us anything to each other. Any communication goes through lawyers or Dr. Reeves. You don't get direct access to me. I understand, Dominic said quietly. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. For everything you've built, for the mother you've become, for surviving me. Your pride is irrelevant to me, Isla replied. I didn't survive you. I survived despite you. There's a difference. She got in her car with Nova and drove away, leaving Dominic standing alone in the parking lot watching the only two people who mattered to him disappear into traffic. Over the following months, Nova decided she wanted limited contact. Letters once a month, supervised video calls on birthdays, maybe one in-person meeting a year. Always with Isla present, always with clear boundaries. Dominic agreed to everything. He wrote letters that Nova read carefully, asking Isla to explain certain words or concepts. He sent birthday gifts that Isla vetted for appropriateness. He showed up to their annual meetings prepared with activities Nova might enjoy, never pushing for more than she offered. He was trying. Isla could see that, but trying didn't erase history. Meanwhile, Isla's gallery continued expanding. She opened a second location in Los Angeles, published a second book on art conservation, was invited to speak at international conferences. Her name became synonymous with integrity in authentication, with giving opportunities to women who'd been overlooked, with building success ethically. And the Ashford name continued fading from relevance. Dominic's restructuring business was modestly successful, but nothing compared to the empire his family had once controlled. He lived in a regular apartment, drove a regular car, existed as a regular person working a regular job, trying to rebuild a reputation that had been destroyed by his own choices. The reversal was complete. The man who had called Isla his worst mistake was watching her thrive while he barely survived. The man who had said he'd rather dance with a stranger than acknowledge her was begging for scraps of time with the daughter they shared. The man who had chosen his family's approval over her love was alone, rejected by everyone who'd once mattered to him. One evening, 3 years after that first meeting, Nova asked Isla a question that had clearly been building. Do you think Dominic really changed, or is he just acting different to get what he wants? Isla considered her answer carefully. I think he changed, she said. I think losing everything forced him to examine who he was, and he didn't like what he found. I think he's genuinely trying to become a better person. But you still don't forgive him, Nova observed. No, Isla said. I don't. Forgiveness isn't something he can earn through good behavior. It's something I would give because I chose to release anger that was poisoning me. And I released that anger years ago, not for him, but for myself. I don't hate him anymore. But I also don't trust him, don't want him in my life, and don't believe his transformation erases what he did. Do you think I should have a relationship with him? Nova asked. I think that's entirely your choice, Isla said. He's your biological father. He's trying to be present in the limited way you've allowed. If having him in your life in a small way makes you feel more complete, that's valid. If it doesn't, that's also valid. You get to decide what serves you. What if I want more contact with him? Nova asked. Like, actually spending time together without you there. Isla felt her chest tighten, but kept her voice steady. Then we'd have to talk about what that looks like, set up safety parameters, make sure you have support if things go wrong. But if that's what you want, I won't stand in your way. My job isn't to protect you from every potential disappointment. It's to give you tools to handle disappointment when it comes. You're a really good mom, Nova said. I try, Isla replied, pulling her daughter close. All I've ever wanted is for you to know your worth, to never let anyone make you feel small, to build a life on your own terms. Everything else is just details. That conversation led to expanded contact. Nova started seeing Dominic every other month, first with Isla present, then with a family therapist present, then finally unsupervised visits lasting a few hours. Dominic proved himself reliable. He showed up on time. He kept promises. He listened when Nova talked and didn't try to buy her affection with expensive gifts. He's actually a good dad, Nova reported after one visit. Like, we just went to a museum and talked about art, and he asked about my school projects. It was normal. Isla felt complicated emotions hearing this. Relief that Nova had a positive relationship with her father. Resentment that Dominic was capable of being a good parent now when he'd been a terrible partner then. Grief for what could have been if he'd found this courage 10 years earlier. But mostly, she felt free. Free because Nova's relationship with Dominic didn't threaten what Isla had built. Free because she'd raised a daughter strong enough to navigate complicated family dynamics. Free because the man who had once destroyed her was now just a person she had to coordinate schedules with occasionally. He'd stopped being important to her story. He was just a footnote, a challenge she'd overcome, a lesson about what not to accept in relationships. When Nova turned 12, she asked if she could have dinner with both parents together. I know it's weird, she said, but I want to see you in the same room. I want to understand what you were like together, even if it's just for one meal. Isla's first instinct was to refuse, but she'd promised to let Nova make her own choices about her father. They met at a neutral restaurant, the three of them sitting at a table that felt symbolic of everything that had broken and rebuilt differently. Dominic looked at Isla across the table with undisguised longing. She looked at him with polite indifference. Thank you for agreeing to this, he said quietly, while Nova was in the bathroom. I know it's uncomfortable for you. It's fine, Isla replied. I don't feel anything about you anymore. Not anger, not resentment, nothing. You're just Nova's father. That's the extent of your relevance to me. I still love you, Dominic said, the words tumbling out. I know I have no right to feel that. No chance of you ever feeling the same, but I need you to know. What I feel for you never went away. It just got buried under cowardice and regret. That's unfortunate for you, Isla said, her voice devoid of emotion. But it's not my problem. I don't love you. I don't think about you. I've built a life so full and rich that your presence in it is negligible. You need to let go of whatever fantasy you're holding on to, because it will never happen. I know, Dominic whispered. I just needed to say it out loud once, to stop carrying it alone. Now you have, Isla said. Don't say it again. Don't make this weird for Nova. Be her father, if you can manage it. But stop looking at me like I'm something you lost, because I was never yours to lose. I belong to myself. Nova returned to the table, and they spent the rest of dinner discussing. her school projects and upcoming art exhibition at Isla's gallery. The conversation was civil, occasionally even pleasant, but it held no hint of the family they could have been. Because they weren't a family. They were three people connected by biology and history, making the best of a situation that had started in destruction and rebuilt into something functional but not warm. And that was fine. Not every story ended with reconciliation. Sometimes the happy ending was learning to exist in the same space without combusting. After dinner, Dominic walked them to Isla's car. "She's an amazing kid," he said. "You've given her everything I would have ruined." "Yes," Isla agreed. "I have." "Do you ever think about what could have been?" Dominic asked. "If I'd been braver. If I'd chosen differently." "No," Isla said honestly. "What could have been doesn't interest me. What is interests me. What is happens to be pretty spectacular. I have a daughter I adore, a career I'm proud of, a life I built from nothing. What could have been is irrelevant compared to what I actually created. I really am proud of you," Dominic said. "I know," Isla replied, "but your pride doesn't add anything to my success. It exists independent of your approval or recognition." "That's the point you keep missing, Dominic. I don't need you to validate what I've built. It stands on its own." She got in her car with Nova and drove away for what felt like the 100th time, leaving him standing alone watching them leave. The years continued passing. Nova grew from a child into a teenager, confident and artistic, planning to study art history in college. She maintained contact with Dominic, visiting him occasionally, including him in major life events, but never calling him Dad. He was Dominic, her father by biology, but Mama was her parent. Isla's gallery expanded to New York, London, and Tokyo. Her authentication services were sought by major museums and private collectors worldwide. She published a third book, spoke at conferences, mentored young women entering conservation fields. She dated occasionally, nothing serious, content with her life exactly as it was, and Dominic remained alone, working his modest job, living his modest life, watching from a distance. As the woman he'd destroyed became everything he'd once tried to prevent her from being. The final public interaction between them came when Nova was 15. Isla was receiving an award from the International Council on Art Preservation, recognition for her contributions to authentication methodology and her work training underrepresented groups in conservation. The ceremony was at a major museum in New York, attended by hundreds of art world professionals. Nova insisted that Dominic be invited. "He's part of my family," she said. "And he's been really supportive of my art stuff. I want him there." So Isla added his name to the guest list and didn't think about it again. Until the night of the ceremony when she saw him sitting in the audience, wearing a suit that probably represented a significant portion of his monthly salary, looking proud in a way that made her feel absolutely nothing. She gave her acceptance speech without acknowledging his presence. "When I started in this field," she said into the microphone, addressing hundreds of people, "I was a woman from Queens who'd been told she didn't belong in certain spaces. I was dismissed by people who thought background mattered more than skill. I was underestimated by those who couldn't see potential beyond pedigree." She paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd without landing on Dominic specifically but somehow making the point regardless. "Being underestimated was the best thing that ever happened to me. It freed me from trying to meet other people's expectations. It forced me to build something authentic instead of acceptable. It taught me that the people who can't see your value are simply revealing their own limitations, not yours." Applause erupted through the hall. "I've spent the last 15 years proving that worth isn't inherited, it's created. That legacy isn't about famous names or old money. It's about meaningful work and positive impact. That the best revenge against people who tried to make you small is becoming so undeniably significant that your existence forces them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about who matters and who doesn't." More applause, people standing now. "To everyone who's been underestimated, dismissed, told you don't belong, this award is for you. Build something so extraordinary that they have to acknowledge you. Become so excellent that your name means more than theirs ever did. Succeed so completely that their rejection becomes the footnote, not the story." The ovation was thunderous. Isla accepted her award, took photos with colleagues, gave interviews to art publications. Through it all, she was aware of Dominic on the periphery, watching, finally understanding. that she had not just survived him, she had eclipsed him entirely. At the reception afterward, Nova brought him over. "Dominic wanted to congratulate you," she said, clearly hoping for a moment of connection between her parents. "Thank you," Isla said politely, as she would to any acquaintance. "That speech was incredible," Dominic said. "Everything you've accomplished is incredible." "I appreciate that," Isla replied neutrally. An awkward pause. "I should let you get back to your colleagues," Dominic said finally, understanding that nothing more was being offered. "Congratulations again." He walked away, and Isla returned to conversations with people who actually mattered to her professional life. Nova looked disappointed. "Would it kill you to be a little warmer to him?" she asked quietly. "Probably not," Isla admitted. "But warmth implies a relationship that doesn't exist. I'm polite to him. I facilitate your relationship with him, but I don't owe him friendship or affection. He's your father, not mine." "He's trying so hard," Nova said. "And that's good for him," Isla replied. "Growth is its own reward. But his transformation doesn't obligate me to anything beyond basic civility. I'm civil. That's enough." It was enough. It had to be enough because Isla had nothing else to give to a man who had once destroyed her and was now a stranger she tolerated for her daughter's sake. The ultimate victory wasn't that Dominic suffered, though he had. It wasn't that his empire fell, though it did. It wasn't even that she succeeded while he failed, though the contrast was stark. The ultimate victory was her complete and total indifference to him. He had become irrelevant, not through hatred or revenge, but through her building a life so full of meaning that his presence or absence was just a minor detail in a much larger story. She had ruined him not through sabotage, but through success, not through cruelty, but through excellence, not through making him fail, but through succeeding so completely that the contrast destroyed him. Every award she won was a reminder that she didn't need him. Every gallery opening showed what she'd built without him. Every woman she mentored proved she was creating the kind of legacy that mattered. And every time Nova came home from visiting Dominic and said it was fine but she missed Mama, Isla was reminded that love wasn't about biology or obligation. It was about showing up consistently, protecting fiercely, and choosing someone every single day. If this story has moved you, if you felt the power of watching someone rise from nothing, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications, because I bring you stories like this every week. Stories about resilience and transformation and people who refuse to let their worst moments define them. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever been underestimated and came back stronger. Tell me your thoughts on Isla's journey. I read every single comment, and your engagement helps this channel grow. Let's build this community together. The final chapter of Isla and Dominic's story came when Nova graduated from high school. Both parents attended, sitting on opposite sides of the auditorium, each proud for different reasons. Isla was proud of the young woman she'd raised alone, the daughter who knew her worth, who'd learned to navigate complicated relationships. With Grace, who'd chosen to study art history and continue her mother's legacy of preservation and authentication. Dominic was proud but also grief-stricken, aware that he'd missed 17 years of this extraordinary person's life, that his moments with her were borrowed time, privileges granted by a daughter more forgiving than he deserved. After the ceremony, Nova brought her parents together for a photo. "Just one," she said. "For me." They stood on either side of her, Isla relaxed and genuine, Dominic stiff with the awareness that this was one of the few times he'd be this close to both of them. The photo captured everything: a successful woman who'd built an empire, a broken man who'd lost everything, and between them, a young woman who represented both the worst of their past and the best of possible futures. Later, at the graduation party Isla hosted at their home, Dominic stood alone on the edge of the gathering watching Isla move through her community of friends, colleagues, the women she'd mentored, the people who made up her actual family. She was radiant, happy in a way she'd never been with him, complete in a way that had nothing to do with romantic partnership and everything to do with purpose and authentic connection. He realized, finally and completely, that she had won, not by destroying him, though his life had certainly been destroyed, not by seeking revenge, though the contrast between their lives was revenge enough, but by becoming so thoroughly and completely herself that his opinion of her had become irrelevant. She had been his worst mistake, but not in the way he'd meant it that night at the gala. His worst mistake was underestimating her, was thinking she needed him to be complete, was believing that taking away his name and money and status would break her. His worst mistake was not realizing that she'd never needed those things in the first place. She'd needed love and respect and partnership. She'd needed someone brave enough to choose her over comfort. She'd needed a partner who saw her value and protected it. He'd given her none of those things, so she'd found them elsewhere, in friendships and community, and the work she poured herself into, in her daughter and the life they'd built together, in the knowledge that she was enough, had always been enough, would always be enough, regardless of who recognized it. That was the woman who ruined him, not through malice, but through excellence, not through revenge, but through resilience, not through tearing him down, but through building something so magnificent that his failure was inevitable by comparison. As the party wound down and guests began leaving, Dominic approached Isla one final time. "I'm going to say something," he said quietly, "and then I'll never say it again. You were never my worst mistake. You were my only real chance at something authentic, and I destroyed it through cowardice. Watching you become this extraordinary force, watching Nova grow up strong and certain, knowing I contributed nothing to either of those miracles, that's my punishment. Not poverty, or public humiliation, or professional failure, just knowing that I had something real and chose comfort over courage." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "You didn't ruin me by being vindictive or cruel. You ruined me by being excellent. Every success you have reminds me of what I lost. Every award, every gallery opening, every moment you shine, I see what I could have been part of if I'd just been braver. That's the ruination, not what you did to me, but what you became without me." Isla listened without expression. "Are you finished?" she asked when he went silent. "Yes." "Good," she said, "because I need you to understand something, Dominic. You didn't lose me. I was never yours to lose. I was a whole person before you, a whole person during our marriage, even when you tried to make me less, and a whole person after. You don't get credit for my success by claiming you could have been part of it. You also don't get to center yourself in my story by calling my excellence your punishment." She stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not who I am because of you or despite you. I'm who I am because I chose myself when no one else would. So take your guilt and your regret and your romantic notion that I'm your lost love and let it go. Move on. Find peace somewhere that doesn't involve me. Be a good father to Nova if you can manage it, but stop looking at me like I'm the one who got away, because I didn't get away from you. I ran toward myself." She turned and walked back to her guests, leaving him standing alone with words that finally, completely, ended whatever he'd been holding on to. He left the party and drove home to his modest apartment, understanding that this was his life now. Not temporary, not a stepping stone to redemption, just his reality. A man who'd had everything and lost it, who'd been given a second chance at fatherhood and barely earned even that, who would spend the rest of his life watching from a distance as the woman he destroyed built something he could never touch. And Isla returned to her party, to her daughter, to her community, to her life that was so full and rich and meaningful that Dominic's presence in it was like a grain of sand, barely noticeable, easily ignored, ultimately insignificant. Years later, when Nova asked her mother if she ever regretted marrying Dominic, Isla thought about it carefully. "No," she said finally, "because that experience taught me what I wouldn't accept. It showed me what I was capable of surviving. It gave me you, and it forced me to build something authentic instead of accepting something hollow. I wouldn't choose to go through it again, but I don't regret that it happened. It made me certain of who I am." "And who are you?" Nova asked, even though she already knew. "I'm a woman who built an empire from nothing," Isla said, "who raised an extraordinary daughter alone, who proved that the worst thing someone can say about you is sometimes the best thing that can happen to you. Because being called a mistake by someone who couldn't see my value freed me to find people who could." She smiled at her daughter. "I'm the woman they underestimated. And that underestimation was the greatest gift they ever gave me. That was the legacy, not revenge or bitterness or hatred, just absolute certainty of her own worth and the freedom that came from never again allowing someone else to define it. She had been called a mistake, and she had become a masterpiece. That was the story. That was the victory. That was the ruination, complete and final and entirely of his own making. And as Isla sat in her beautiful gallery surrounded by art she'd authenticated and women she'd mentored, and a daughter she'd raised to be strong, she understood that some stories don't end with forgiveness or reconciliation. Some stories end with freedom. And freedom, it turned out, was worth more than any apology could ever be. Here's the truth that Isla learned and that I want to leave you with today. When someone shows you they don't value you, believe them. When someone makes you feel small, leave. When someone calls you a mistake, let them, because their inability to see your worth says everything about them and nothing about you. Isla could have stayed. She could have kept trying to earn the love of people who would never give it. She could have raised Nova in that toxic environment, teaching her daughter that love required shrinking yourself to fit someone else's expectations. But she didn't. She walked away with nothing and built everything. That's the power you have. The power to choose yourself. The power to say this isn't what I deserve and mean it. The power to build something so authentic and excellent that the people who rejected you become irrelevant. Dominic didn't ruin Isla. He revealed who he was, and she responded by becoming who she was always meant to be. That's not his story. That's hers. And if you're in a situation right now where someone is making you feel less than, where someone is treating your worth as negotiable, where someone is asking you to be smaller so they can feel bigger, I need you to hear this. Leave. Build. Become. Leave the situation that's destroying you. Build something authentic from the ashes. Become so completely yourself that their opinion becomes background noise. You are not anyone's worst mistake. You are not anyone's project or charity case or burden. You are complete exactly as you are, and the right people will recognize that. The wrong people will reveal themselves through their inability to see your value. Let them, thank them even, for showing you who they are before you waste more time trying to convince them of what they'll never understand. Then do what Isla did. Walk away. Build an empire. Raise your children, literal or metaphorical, to know their worth. Create something so meaningful that the people who rejected you become a footnote in a much larger story. That's the revenge. That's the victory. That's the ruination. Not through cruelty, but through excellence. Not through destruction, but through creation. Not through making them fail, but through succeeding so completely that the contrast speaks for itself. Before I let you go, I need 3 things from you. First, smash that like button if this story resonated with you. Second, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications because I bring you stories like this every single week. Stories about resilience and transformation and people who refuse to let their worst moments define them. And third, drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever been underestimated. Tell me what Isla's story meant to you. Right. I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline, if this message hit home. Your engagement helps this channel grow, helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them, helps build a community of people who believe in choosing themselves. Remember, someone's worst mistake in underestimating you could be the best thing that ever happened. Their loss, your gain, your empire. Until next time, this is Mr. Hearthline reminding you that your worth was never up for debate. You just had to stop asking people who couldn't see it. Now go build something extraordinary. I'll see you in the next story.